Australia's Millennium Drought, also called the Big Dry, is one of the worst droughts to have ever impacted the continent of Australia. It was characterized by the period of lowest average annual rainfall that has ever been recorded on the continent, and it lasted from 1996 to 2009. The four of us are going to discuss the major causes of this drought, as well as its impacts on the agriculture sector, urban water supply, and water policy. El Nino is one of the primary causes of this drought, and I wanted to explain exactly why El Nino contributes to droughts over Australia. So normally what you'll find if you look towards the equator are winds that blow from east to west. This is the opposite of what we normally experience in the mid-latitudes. And these are called the trade winds. What El Nino and La Nina are a change in the direction of these trade winds. La Nina is a strengthening of the trade winds, so they blow even stronger from the east to the west. What this does is it pushes the warm water at the surface of the Pacific Ocean to the west towards Australia, and this creates an area of heavy thunderstorms and rain over the continent. In an El Nino year, these trade winds actually weaken or completely reverse, and so they blow from the west to the east. This pushes the warm water at the surface of the Pacific towards the coast of South America. And Australia, instead of experiencing heavy thunderstorms and rain, actually experiences dry, sinking air that leads to a lack of precipitation. When this drought was in its initial stages, the 1996-1997 Super El Nino occurred, and this was one of the strongest El Ninos ever recorded. It combined with other natural climate cycles to produce some of the lowest average annual rainfall that Australia has ever seen. Even once this El Nino ended, and in years that were not characterized by an El Nino, they continued to experience below average rainfall, including in 2002. This drought then persisted due to a combination of high temperatures and natural climate cycles, as well as inconsistent rainfall and decreased soil moisture. And it was worsened by climate change. We can never say that an event is actually caused by climate change, but we can say that it contributed to the event itself. And this drought was definitely worsened by climate change. The drought was not ended until 2010-2011, whenever one of the strongest La Ninas ever recorded, combined with other natural climate cycles to produce the second wettest year on record for Australia in 2010. This, combined with below average temperatures, alleviated the stress of the past 10 years of drought. However, on the flip side, these heavy rains in 2010-2011 caused some of the worst floods that Queensland has ever seen.
Next, we will explain the agricultural, domestic, and political effects of the Millennium Drought. The Millennium Drought greatly impacted the rice industry. Excessive heat and low water availability devastated the rice crop. Water became scarcer, and in 2007, farmers received only 1/8 of the water that they were promised by the government. As a result, there was a 33% decrease in total rice capacity due to crop failure and farmers leaving the industry. By the peak of the drought in 2008, 98% of the rice crop failed and the entire industry collapsed. Next, the livestock industry was also hit hard. Low rainfall and continued grazing exhausted grass pastures, and livestock farmers were forced to import hay and grain to feed their animals. This was significantly more expensive, however, and many were forced to cull their herds to reduce feeding costs. The sheep industry was hit the hardest. The graph on the right shows how the population dropped from 145 million in the 1990s to 73 million in the late 2000s. Due to the population decline, wool production also decreased by 40%. Now we will analyze the national and international impacts of the drought. The drought was costly to Australia. There was a $7.4 billion decrease in agricultural production, and the government spent about $4 billion in aid to help farming families. Internationally, the collapse of Australia's rice industry led to a global rice shortage, which resulted in numerous food protests in Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. Finally, Australia needed to find a cheaper alternative for importing livestock feed. They collaborated with Zimbabwe to help farmers begin practicing holistic grazing in the livestock industry. Instead of grazing herds over large pastures for extended times, animals are now grazed in small pastures and moved daily to new fields. This allowed for farmers to graze their livestock but didn't exhaust the landscape. The photo on the right shows a dried pasture in 2007 and its transformation by 2015 after 8 years of holistic grazing.
So now on to the domestic effects of the Millennium Drought. One of the major ways that domestic water use is affected during a drought is government-placed water restrictions. So these are Sydney's water restrictions. As you can see, they had 3 different levels of restrictions during this drought. And they decided to put a certain level of restriction into place when water reaches a certain level in the dam. So as you can see, some of the rules are pretty strict. No sprinklers. They can only water their lawns during less busy times. And as the levels go up, it's less times a week to save water. And buildings and vehicles is an interesting category because they actually didn't add this until 2009. Thankfully, they have not had to use a level 2 or 3 water restriction since then, so they don't have any rules for those two categories. Two more categories of water restrictions are swimming pools and hard surfaces. So obviously, they don't want to encourage people building swimming pools during a drought because that wastes a lot of water to fill it up. And hard surfaces, cleaning them is kind of viewed as unnecessary. So during a drought, they discourage people from doing this. So, some conservation practices that Australians have adopted since the drought and during the drought. You can see kind of right after the drought to a few years after, about 5 to 10% of Australians have changed to a front loading washing machine, which at first may not seem like a big deal, but a front loading washing machine actually uses up to 1/3 less water than a top loading washing machine. Australians are also much better about using water efficient appliances. As you can see, 82% use water efficient shower heads and 74% have water efficient taps, while Americans, we have a much lower percentage of people who use these water efficient appliances. So, why are Australians so much more aware and just so much better about water conservation? One reason is because drought is more of a concern for them, so they naturally need to be more concerned. But another reason is because water companies in Australia, they don't just bill you like water companies in America do. So these water companies in Australia actually like run commercials like this one down below about the camel and post advertisements to raise awareness. They also provide educational resources for teachers. So they try to start that mentality of conservation really young. And they've also funded a program. So the government of New South Wales funds a program called Water Fix offered by Sydney Water. And this program actually offers free water efficient shower heads and leaky tap repairs and discounted prices on other water efficient appliances.
The National Water Initiative was made as ministerial councils, the Australian government, and state and territory governments committed to increase the efficiency of Australia's water use and create more certainty for productivity in communities and for the environment. It was a national plan for water reform with commitments to prepare water plans, create sustainable water use in stressed water systems, introduce water rights and standards for accounting, expand trade in water rights, improve pricing for storage and delivery, and better manage water demands. The Water Efficiency Labeling and Standards Act had several objectives. These were to reduce consumption and conserve water supplies, provide information for those who purchase water use and saving technologies, give the minister the power to decide what products can be regulated, and appoint WELS inspectors and define their powers. Specifically, they can enforce the standards of water so that consumers can trust the water rating label. They also make sure businesses are selling the registered and labeled water-using products, like showers, dishwashers, and washing machines. The Water Act ensures that the Murray-Darling Basin, which is the largest water source for Australia, is managed for national interest, and it was made in response to the drought and potential effects of climate change. It has been called a National Water Plan for Water Security. It established the Murray-Darling Basin Authority and a Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder that manages environmental water to protect and restore the assets of the basin, oversee a wide portfolio of environmental water that has allocations throughout the government, and make decisions based on the Water Act. It also gives the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission the role of making and enforcing water charge and market rules. In addition, it gives the Productivity Commission the job of reporting how effective the plan is and its progress towards achieving goals. There were amendments made in 2008, 2012, 2013, 2015, and 2016. The Murray-Darling Basin Water Authority was created as part of the Water Act and is an independent organization to plan the basin's water resources. Their mission statement is the Murray-Darling Basin Authority aims to achieve a healthy working basin for the benefits of the Australian community. Their jobs are to prepare, implement, and review a plan for the use of the water resources, operate the system and deliver water to users, measure and record the quality of the water, conduct research about the resources and ecosystems, advise the Australian Government Minister for Water Resources on the accreditation of state water plans, and engage and educate the Australian community about water resources.